Judge Darrow is kicking him when he's down. Convicted Waukesha parade attacker Darrell Brooks has been ordered to pay an additional $355,000. I can't even believe I just said that. There's not a 5 there. I just made up a number. Convicted Waukesha parade attacker Darrell Brooks has been ordered to pay an additional $350,000 in restitution. Now, this is on top of the $170,000 that he was already ordered at his original sentencing. That brings his grand total that he has to repay to somewhere around $523,000. Well, since he's scheduled to serve about 700 years in prison, give or take, he only needs to repay about $750 per year to work off the $523,000 that he owes. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems very doable to me. Now, I'm thinking that if he works on his resume and he gives a good interview, he could get a job in prison making probably about 50 cents per hour. So if he works full-time, which is about 2,000 hours per year, he'd make about $1,000 a year. And then he can pay about 75% of that for restitution and still have a little walking around money for the jail. That seems very doable. Just needs to do that starting in 2024 and then lasting about 700 years. Easy peasy. Hashtag financial planning. Oh, wait, I forgot. Restitution is capped at 25% of his paycheck, so he's gonna have to find a job that pays $1.50 an hour. So if it's gonna take Darrell Brooks over 700 years to pay all his money back, why increase his restitution? Let's talk about it. District Attorney Sue Opper requested that the money be added to Brooks' sentence for several reasons. First, she pointed out that all of the victims of the parade attack were made whole thanks to the Crime Victim Compensation Fund and insurance companies. Made whole. What a great, but also stupid legal term. To be made whole means that a victim has been restored by the payment of money to the place that they were just before the crime. A simple example is if someone steals a diamond ring from you that's worth $5,000. You get paid back $5,000. You've been made whole. Okay, but what if the diamond ring is worth $5,000 and it belonged to your great-great-grandmother and has been worn by 5 generations of women in your family? Well, it's still only worth $5,000, and if you get restitution, you get paid $5,000. So the law says you are fine now. You don't even miss the old ring that was in your family for 130 years. You have been made whole. And then, of course, an even murkier area of mental gymnastics is the application of the made whole doctrine to human suffering and even to loss of life. Brooks had over 70 victims. Does anyone really think that the payment of money to them for their pain or to their surviving family members in the event that we're talking about someone who died makes anyone whole? Money? Please say no. Seeing as the CVC is funded by taxpayers, Opper made the argument that the fund should be repaid as well as the insurance companies. The district attorney was also quick to point out that, thanks to the international attention that Brooks's case garnered, it was very possible that he could be offered a book deal or a movie deal and be compensated for it. If that were to happen, it was important that the money be used to pay back the funds that were used to help the victims. Finally, she made the case that if Brooks did get a job in jail, it would be rehabilitative for him to see the money leave his paycheck. Kind of a constant reminder of the debt that he was paying to society. Next, let's take a look at the defense's arguments. That's right, Darrell Brooks is finally allowing the legal system to work the way it was intended to. He has legal representation. Now, his lawyer's name is Covey, and Covey first addresses Opper's claims that Brooks could potentially get a book deal or a movie deal out of the parade attack. He argued that the possibility was so minuscule that the argument shouldn't be given any weight. The crux of his opposition to the additional restitution came from the 5 factors of Wisconsin Statute 973.20, subsection 13. The first factor for the court to consider is the amount of loss suffered by any victim as a result of the crime considered at the time of the sentencing. The second is the financial resources of the defendant. The third is the present and future earning ability of the defendant. 4 is the needs and earning ability of the defendant's dependents, which is, children. And the final factor is any other factor that the court deems appropriate. Pretty much whatever they want to think about or talk about. The two factors that Brooks's attorney leans on here are the second and third factors. Attorney Covey reminded the judge that Darrell Brooks had significant financial problems even before the trial began. He claims that Brooks doesn't have any savings or inheritance or assets. He's not owed any money that would somehow make it worthwhile to add to his restitution. He made the point that if those two factors were ignored when making a decision, Judge Darrow would be sending a message that those two factors didn't matter at all. Now, that's the best argument that Covey can make, obviously, but ultimately, it can't carry the day because the statute explicitly charges courts with the duty to examine future earnings, aka to speculate about the unknowable. Well, there's a non-zero chance that Brooks could somehow possess valuable IP or intellectual property in the form of his story, aka his madness. If he monetizes that property, then restitution is called for. Attorney Covey then calls out District Attorney Opper in the nicest way possible by saying he doesn't agree that adding extra zeros to the already astronomical amount would be rehabilitative. It's just extra punishment. Wow. Extra zeros? That is absurd. There actually aren't enough zeros on the judgment. He took human lives. He injured people, wrecking lives that he didn't technically even end. How can you put a dollar value on that damage or on those losses? Restitution is almost always ordered in cases with a criminal conviction or a guilty plea. Sometimes the restitution is something that the defendant can pay when they finish their jail sentence. A great example would be someone vandalizes the door of a store. That's a realistic amount of money that someone can eventually pay. Other times it's just symbolic. The Darrell Brooks restitution is symbolic because the damage that he did to the lives of his victims and their families can't actually be monetized. And he couldn't pay it even if he weren't in prison. And he's been sentenced to a term that's about the length of time since Columbus landed in America. Well, we all know how this ends, right? Judge Darrow played a long, difficult game against Brooks in the trial, suffering much at the hands of his incredible foolishness. He's so much more pleasant when he has a lawyer, and mute buttons really makes a difference. Anyways, of course Judge Darrow did the right thing and ordered a hefty amount of restitution. But I mean, raise your hand if you wanted it to be more. Sidebar, speaking of Judge Darrow, let's have a little life update for her. As you well know, she announced that she was running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court back in November of 2022. Well, unfortunately for her, she didn't make it out of the primaries. She ran as a conservative judge, and the final election was between a progressive and a different conservative. You probably heard about this. As it turns out, the position that was available on the Supreme Court was set to tip the balance of voting power, either liberal or conservative, on the Supreme Court, and abortion became a critical issue. Outside money poured into the state of Wisconsin. In fact, it got kind of wild. Some reports indicate that as much as $42 million was spent on just one seat on the court. Isn't it weird that money can be spent to buy a seat on a court? Yikes! At the end of the 30-minute hearing, Judge Darrow decided to add over $350,000 to Brooks's restitution judgment. In handing down the additional sentence, she recalled Brooks's behavior during the televised trial in which he showed no remorse and took no responsibility for his actions. She also made it clear that she didn't think it was impossible that someone would reach out to Darrell Brooks with an offer for a movie or a book, a TV show, etc. And she's not wrong. These days, society has a fascination with true crime. No one should dispute that fact. But I want to know what you think. What's your pro se opinion? Do you think that a movie or book deal is in Brooks's future? And would you be tuning in if Darrell Brooks's story turned up on your Netflix homepage? Let me know down below in the comments. I will see you soon for the next update. And don't forget to lawyer up and subscribe to this channel. See ya.